What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Endless TBR. My name is Christian, and this is my YouTube channel where I love to talk about books. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to click on this video where I want to outline the top 10 favorite books that I read in 2025. It's been an awesome year. I read a lot of great books. It was really difficult to whittle this list down to just top 10. I do have some honorable mentions that I want to share with you about 10 or so books that almost made it into my top 10 but didn't quite get there. Basically, what I did was I looked at all the books that I read throughout the year and I had a little journal on the side. And anytime I saw a book that I thought could potentially make it into my top 10, like definitely a 5-star book, I copied it over to my journal. By the end of that, I had about 20 books total, so I whittled it down to my top 10. All the other books that I'm going to talk about, my little honorable mention stack here, are all going to be books that made it into my journal. They were in the running to be in my top 10, but they just didn't quite make the cut for various reasons. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some books. We'll let you know ahead of time. I didn't really read a lot of new releases in 2025, pretty much none. I think there's one book in this list that came out in 2025, and that's about it. So I read mostly like older-ish books, some from the 2010s, some a little bit older than that. But just to let you know about that, and also these honorable mentions are not going to be in any particular order. When I get to my top 10, I'm going to rank them from least favorite to favorite. But these honorable mentions are just I stack them from biggest book to smallest book, so that's the order that they're in. So coming in, my first honorable mention is Salem's Lot by Stephen King, an absolutely wonderful vampire book, and only Stephen King's second novel, I believe, and it was a really great time. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Next up is the book Horns by Joe Hill. This is Stephen King's son, and this is the first full-length novel that I read by him. It's about this guy named Iggy Parrish who wakes up one day with horns growing out of his head, and everybody in town is acting weirdly towards him, and they also think he's a murderer, and he's trying to get to the bottom of what the heck is going on with these horns growing out of his head. And Iggy Parrish is definitely one of my favorite characters in any book that I've read in 2025. He's a really tragic character and had an awesome journey in this book. So that is Horns right there. Next up is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. By far my favorite Agatha Christie novel that I've read so far, and my favorite that I read in 2025, obviously. This book was just so much fun from beginning to end. It's a short book, but it is a roller coaster. And by the end, when the whole murder is laid out in front of you and you finally see who committed the crime, it just had my jaw on the floor, and I had so much fun with it. All of these books are a blast, but the Murder of Roger Ackroyd just had a couple extra twists that I particularly enjoyed. So that is that there. Next up, when it comes to probably what is the most important book on here historically, an argument could be made for this one, but this is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, a book that I didn't know if I'd love. Sometimes when you go back and read classics, they can be a little like outdated or difficult to read. You can see like I understand why this was an important book, but it's not one of my favorites that I've read recently. Frankenstein proved me wrong there. This is a great book that I enjoyed a lot despite its age. And something that took me back a little bit was it's less of a horror novel. Like it's definitely got those horror elements in it, but this is just a sad tale. And I felt so bad for Frankenstein's monster by the end of this book, and Dr. Frankenstein himself. It's just a tragic story, and it gave me some nice emotional feels. So that is Frankenstein right there. Next up, another honorable mention is God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert, a book that I didn't know if I'd really like it that much when I was reading it, but by the time I finished it and the more I've sat on it, the more I look back, and I love this book so much. It is the most bizarre book I think I've ever read in my life. If you like the idea of a 1500-year-old god worm that is just spending 400 pages philosophizing and trying to save the human race in his own way while also being the biggest asshole in the universe, then this is the book for you. And I had so much fun reading this. It is easily my second favorite of the Frank Herbert Dune books behind the original. So that is God Emperor of Dune. Next up, we have Mary by Nat Cassidy. This is the first book that I read as part of the book club that I started this year with my friends and my fiance. And I went into this completely blind. This is a really entertaining story about this poor woman whose name is Mary, and she is just the textbook definition of an unreliable narrator. She's a little bit older, she's a little bit down on her life, she's having some mental health issues, and she gets summoned back to her hometown to take care of her aunt who is dying, and all kinds of weird culty stuff starts happening. And unfortunately, Mary is just kind of mentally deranged. So throughout the book, you're like, is this real? Is this Mary just making up stuff in her head? But it is a great roller coaster, and I had so much fun reading this. And Mary is another character who is definitely one of my favorite main characters that I've read throughout this year, along with Iggy Parish from Horns. So that is Mary right there. Next up, we have Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. This is like if Dark Souls and Lovecraft had a baby, and it was set in like medieval France. This book had some of the most disgusting and gruesome descriptions of like monsters and battles and injuries that I've read throughout this entire year. It is an extremely entertaining book, and despite being very scary and graphic and violent, it is also quite heartfelt. There are a lot of relationships between characters in this main book that did definitely get me a little emotional towards the end of the novel. So a great emotional and yet also violent and scary read if you like old school horror like this. Next up, we have a book I've talked a lot about on this channel. I read it in 2025, and that is Del Toro Quest by Emily Rada. I didn't include this in my top 10, even though it is one of my favorite books of all time, just because this is not only a reread in 2025, this is like a reread of a reread of a reread. I've read this book like 10 times in my life, so it felt weird putting this in my top 10. But just know that this is my absolute favorite children's fantasy series and one of my favorite books of all time. And I just, you know me, I can't go a video without talking about Del Toro Quest. So that is on there as well. Then my cat's under my blanket here. I'm trying not to crush her beneath my books. Next up, I felt I didn't want to. This is my last honorable mention. I didn't want to include an entire series of books into my top 10 list, even though all three of the books in this trilogy would probably end up on my top 10 list. So I took my two non-favorites and put it in my honorable mention. I'm not making any sense. Mistborn: The Final Empire and Mistborn: The Well of Ascension. I love both of these books so much. The Mistborn Era 1 trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, right there behind like Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. And so, spoiler alert, The Hero of Ages is in my top 10 list, but where it will be, we'll find out. But I didn't want to include the entire trilogy in my top 10, so I threw both of these ones in my honorable mentions as well. So those are my honorable mentions, all books that almost made it into my top 10 list, but didn't quite make the cut. So let's talk about my top 10 favorite books of all time. These are going to be ranked in order from my least favorite to favorite, but obviously these are my top 10. So these are all books that I absolutely adored. So coming in at number 10 is actually a very recent book that I finished. There are three books in this list that I finished in December, which I kind of did on purpose. I saved a lot of great books until the end of the year, but this is one that was not on my radar at all. My fiance recommended it to me. I knew nothing about it going in, and I listened to it on audiobook. It is The Good Samaritan by John Marrs. There is not a single book this year that made me go like, oh, like, no, no, he didn't. Like that kind of reaction, like an audible gasp, more than this book did. It is the story of this woman. Her name is Laura. She works for a suicide hotline called End of the Line. They're supposed to be impartial ears that listen to people's problems. They're not supposed to sway them in one direction. They're just supposed to listen and be an ear that like these distressed people can reach out to. Laura is a terribly disturbed person, and she tries to, in her own manipulative way, convince these people to end their own lives because she has this obsession with being involved in people's suicides. So she is doing that. She kind of messes with the wrong people, and all this drama ensues. And when I tell you, this book had so many twists and turns that I didn't see coming that, like I said, made me go like, oh man, like, oh crap. So it was so much fun. I was not expecting it to be on this list. When I was looking at all these books I read, I was like, this book elicited such an emotional reaction from me. I had to include it on this list. So that is The Good Samaritan, coming in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero and Tom Bissell. This is a book about the making of The Room, which is one of the greatest worst movies of all time. It is a awful movie that has become a cult classic. It was written and directed and starred in by this guy named Tommy Wiseau, who is one of the most bizarre humans you will ever read about in your entire life. And Greg Sestero was Tommy's like best friend and co-star in The Room, and he wrote this book about the making of The Room. They made a movie based off of this book, also called The Disaster Artist, that stars James and Dave Franco, who play Tommy and Greg in the movie. And this book is, as somebody who's been a lifelong fan of The Room, I've been watching that movie ever since I was in like middle school, reading this book and just experiencing the true tale behind the making of this absolute train wreck of a movie was so entertaining. There is not any book that I've read in 2025 that made me laugh out loud more so than The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero. So much so that I went to a meet and greet with Greg earlier this year and actually got this copy signed because I wanted to have a signed copy of it because I love this book so much. So if you've never heard of it before, I highly recommend you watch The Room and then watch The Disaster Artist, the movie, and then read this book because it is such an amazing tale that is hilarious and filled with the most bizarre stuff you'll ever see in your life. So that is my number 9. Number 8, we have a book that I think was also in the number 8 spot on my top 10 favorite books of all time, so it's not moved much. That is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, the story of this teacher, science teacher named Ryland Grace, who wakes up one day on a spaceship alone in space. He has amnesia, so he has no idea like who he is or why he got there, and he slowly starts to remember this tale of the sun is dying, and so the Earth is dying along with it, and he has been sent on this mission to try to investigate this like microphage that is off in the galaxy sucking energy from the sun. So along the way, he encounters another being, and it turns kind of like into a buddy cop science mission in space where they're both trying to save their planets, and it is so much fun. I was worried when I started this book. I'm not a huge sci-fi guy. I mostly dabble in like fantasy and horror, so I was worried there's a lot of like technical language in here. I don't know how accurate it is to like actual science because I don't know anything about that stuff. I was worried it was going to be too much, but it ended up being perfectly fine. You don't need to know science stuff to enjoy this book. The best part of it is the relationship between Ryland Grace and the other character that he meets along the way, and just the relationship they form and the adventure that they go on. It's a non-stop book. It just the action keeps going and it is highly entertaining. So that is Project Hail Mary, a really great time. Number 7, this is actually the second most recent book that I finished this year. I finished it just a few days ago, but I knew immediately that it was going to have to end up on my top 10, and that is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This book is excellent. My fiance recommended it to me. It is her favorite Joe Hill book of all time, and she said, you got to finish this book because it's going to change your life. And this is one of the greatest examples of character work that I think I've ever seen. There's like 3 or 4 main characters in this book, and all of them are so well fleshed out and incredible. I felt very emotionally attached to each of them, even the big bad guy. Like, he is a despicable, disgusting character, but he's been one of my favorite characters that I've read so far. So it's basically the story of this guy named Charlie Manx. He is this like serial child kidnapper, and he has a supernatural ability where he can take these kids in his car to a place called Christmas Land, where it is always Christmas and these kids never age. And he takes these kids out of like these broken homes, and is in his own way he is saving them and kidnapping these children. This our main character, Vic McQueen, gets caught up in Charlie Manx's schemes. She also has her own kind of supernatural ability to be able to basically fast travel wherever she wants to, and the two of them get into this supernatural battle over the fate of these children that Charlie is kidnapping. And it is excellent. Sometimes you read a book and it's 200 pages, but it feels like it's 1,000 pages. This is the opposite. This book is over 600 pages, and it felt like it was a 100-page novella because of how quickly I read through it and how well Joe Hill's writing is. So that is Nosferatu, coming in at number 7. Coming in at number 6, the final book on this list that I read in December, and that is Trials of the Jedi by Charles Soule, the final book in Star Wars The High Republic. Star Wars The High Republic it's had its ups and downs, but overall, I'm so satisfied with the series, and this book had a lot riding on it. This was kind of like the make it or break it for the series for me, is how it all wraps up. In a way, coming towards the end of The High Republic, it felt like it was culminating in like an epic showdown, but in other ways it didn't. So this book had a big task of pulling together these dozens and dozens of characters that we've been introduced to over the course of 20 plus books, and wrapping it up in a way that was satisfying. And I'm happy to say that I think it was extremely satisfying. Charles Soule has by far written the two best Star Wars High Republic books, with Light of the Jedi at the beginning and then Trials of the Jedi. I felt very satisfied in how this book wrapped up. The stakes were high. You never knew which characters were going to make it and which characters weren't. And so overall, just super satisfying. The only tiny gripe I have is one of my favorite characters in the High Republic barely appeared in this book, so that made me a little sad. But he had a lot to work with, so many characters, and I was very happy with the conclusion. So that is Trials of the Jedi. Coming in at number 5, we have The Shining by Stephen King. I don't really know what to say too much about The Shining that hasn't been said. I mean, obviously, it is a classic book. I had never read it up until this year, although I had seen the movie many, many times. The movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. And finally getting to experience the book was just an incredible experience. Obviously, there are a lot of differences between the book and the movie, but getting to finally experience the source material and getting an inside look into Jack Torrance's mind as he slowly loses his sanity and breaks apart his little family up there in the Overlook Hotel was a great experience, and I had so much fun reading this book. It's definitely up there as one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time. Although it's not my favorite, I have one more Stephen King book that's actually coming next up on the list. But if you haven't read The Shining, it is a classic horror tale that is it's less of the supernatural elements in the book and more of the horror of just seeing Jack devolve into this terrifying and horrible father who is battling alcoholism, as long as kind of like the supernatural elements of the Overlook Hotel and how it's starting to degrade him mentally and seeing his decline. That is the true horror of this novel, and I really loved it. So that is number 5, The Shining. Coming in at number 4, the other Stephen King book on this list, one that really took me by surprise, and that is Night Shift. It is his first published short story collection. Had read one other short story collection before I read Night Shift. It was Everything's Eventual, which is one of my least favorite of Stephen King's works. And so going into this, I was a little worried. I was like, maybe Stephen King's short stories just aren't for me, but I was totally wrong. Night Shift was a blast from beginning to end. There isn't a single story in this collection that I didn't at least really like, but most of them I loved. Like just some of them off the top of my head. Obviously, you have classics like Children of the Corn is in this book. Another one that pops out to me is a story called The Lawnmower Man, which is one of the most bizarre short stories I've ever read in my life, about this guy that is basically a lawnmower and he just he eats everything, and you have to read it, but it's so weird. And then another one, I think it's called Quitters Inc., which is about this company that gets people to quit smoking in a very extreme way that was very entertaining. And there's another book, I think it might be Night Shift, I can't remember. It's the one about the rats. It's right at the beginning of the book. I'm gonna look. I think it might be the title short story here. Graveyard Shift, that's what it is. Graveyard Shift was another great one about these guys that have to clean out this like basement of a building that is just infested by rats, and it's one of those stories that just makes your skin crawl. So that is Night Shift right there, a great short story collection, and one that I didn't see coming. I didn't know it was going to end up on this list. Coming in at number 3, this is a book that I think in previous videos I said I read it in 2024, and I was wrong. I read this in the very beginning of 2025. This book has been on my top 10 favorite books of all time. It's been on on a video I said of 8 books I want to reread in 2026, and it is The Cold People and Other Fairy Tales from Nowhere by Felix Blackwell. And this book right here is, I don't think it's very well known, and I actually think it's one of Blackwell's least popular books. I know that Stolen Tongues is his most popular book, but this is by and far my favorite short story collection that I've ever read in my life. It is something about Felix Blackwell's writing, to me, is so creepy and so unsettling, and he makes you terrified of things that you would have never thought that you would be terrified of. There's one particular story in here that always jumps out at me, and I can't remember the name of it, but it is about this guy that is just in a bathroom, and this woman, this like deranged looking creepy woman, is just crawling out of the air vents trying to get at him and kill him. And he keeps trying to run out of this bathroom, and he's caught in this endless hallway of bathrooms as this woman is just chasing after him and trying to kill him. And it's so unsettling. And there's a lot of other great stories like that in here as well. But this is one I'm definitely going to reread in 2026. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and it is one of my favorite books that I read in 2025 as well. So if you haven't read The Cold People, I definitely recommend checking it out. All right, my final two. It is time. I mentioned it earlier. This is my second favorite book of all time and my favorite book in this trilogy, and that is The Hero of Ages, the book 3 in Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. Not since reading The Lord of the Rings do I think there has been a trilogy that has impacted me as much as this trilogy has. I know that Mistborn is super popular. A lot of people have read it, so the hype is all over the place, but I'm just going to add to it because I had such a great time reading this trilogy. And I was a little worried because sometimes when you get to the conclusion, it can kind of, a lot of times the third book is like the worst. The conclusion might not be as satisfying. I was so satisfied with the way this book ended. Each character, I think, had an incredible ending tale, and the way that the mythology expanded of this world by the end, like as everybody took their place in the world at the conclusion of this, I just thought was really magical. Like, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. And Brandon Sanderson has this way of writing action that I think is the most entertaining action that I've read in any book I've read so far. A lot of times when it comes to action sequences, I get a little bit bored because it's, talking about group movements doing this and da 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 da. But the way that Brandon Sanderson writes action is just thrilling, and I think it has a lot to do with the metal burning system, the magic system that he's incorporated into this world. It just makes those battle sequences so thrilling to listen to read. I mean, and yeah, The Hero of Ages is my second favorite book that I read this year. I was in awe by the time I finished it. I was so happy with the conclusion. So that is my second favorite book of the year. And then finally, my favorite book of the year, pretty much by far. I didn't even have to think about this one. I knew the moment that I read it, it was probably going to be my favorite of the year because I loved it. This is an all-timer for me. That is The Terror by Dan Simmons. 800 pages of masterpiece. Like, it is a great historical fiction story. It is a great horror story. It is a great character piece. It is about these two ships that get stuck north of like the Arctic Circle, and these two ships full of these sailors that are trying to survive as they're trapped in the ice. The temperature is plummeting, and then to make it worse, there's this supernatural entity that is out on the ice, slowly picking off these men. And the reason why I like this book so much, and it is probably my favorite horror novel of all time, is it is scary from so many different fronts. Not only do you have the supernatural element, which is scary, the creature that is lurking out on the ice, you have the more human elements as well. Like, these guys are starting to run out of food. Some of their food gets tainted and it is slowly starting to kill them. They're starting to have to battle with scurvy. And Dan Simmons goes into great detail about the things that scurvy does to the human body, and it is so disturbing. You've got the temperatures and how these guys are having their limbs frozen off due to the sub-zero temperatures, and eventually they have to come to the decision: are they going to stay on these ships and just try to hope that someone saves them, or are they going to go out onto the ice where there are hundreds of miles of nothing and try to find salvation somewhere? So the Terror is one of the greatest books I've ever read. I cannot wait to read more Dan Simmons, and it is hands down my favorite book that I read in 2025, and easily one of my favorite books of all time. So definitely check this one out. If there's any book from this list I think you should read, it is The Terror by Dan Simmons for sure. So that is my top 10 favorite books of 2025, along with some honorable mentions. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what your 10 favorite books are from this year, and let me know if you've read any of these books that are on my list, and if you enjoyed any of them. But my name is Christian. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I will catch you in the next one. Y'all have a beautiful day and have a happy new year. Peace out.